in case anyone ever was wondering whether or not I drank coffee while recording this show, the answer is sometimes, not always. It depends on what time I'm recording and what's going on or whatever. But today happens to be one of those days. It's actually early afternoon, not late morning at the moment. Went to the gym this morning, came home, want to be productive throughout the course of the afternoon, a little burst of energy, plus just nice to sit down and have a cup of coffee. This is follow-up to last episode where I was talking about, I'll link to it, but the overall thrust of things was really around how we tend to move the goalposts on ourselves. And also not just the idea of sort of this endless moving of goalposts trying to stride to the next goal, but also trying to look at some of the pros and cons to that approach. As I said last time, there are some pros to having a constant thing to strive for. It gives you something to shoot for. You never become complacent in that way, I suppose. But there are cons where you never feel quite satisfied. You never, you kind of feel like you arrive and then it doesn't matter because you have the next thing to go for. And it's sort of this almost like a scaling issue. I talked about it, for instance, in terms of salaries or something where, first you want to make 50K, then 60, then 70, then 100, then 200, then, and somehow the more money you make, you're not really any better off. Because in a lot of ways, your lifestyle has probably changed as well along the way. So you're always pushing for the next thing. And that just being one example. But anyway, the point of this episode, what I did in that episode was sort of pose this as a question or a thought experiment. And then what I wanted to do for this episode was I went and I plugged in essentially the transcript that came out of that episode. I plugged it into, in this case, ChatGPT, turned on like the deep research mode, and then had it just kind of go to town. And there's a few interesting things here. First of all, and this is just, purely kind of logistical ChatGPT itself kind of thing. But interestingly, I hadn't really used much with the deep research mode before. When you have it do that, it spits out what essentially is attempting to be a research paper. I know that sounds like silly that I should be surprised at that. I mean, the mode is called deep research. I just didn't expect it to literally spit out a thing that had, like an abstract and all these citations, and like it sort of looks like a research paper. Now, to what extent there is more research on these subjects. Some of this seems maybe a little shallow to me. I don't know. But then again, my topic was pretty broad. So, I wasn't trying to ask it, and I didn't spend a lot of time prompting it either. I didn't spend a lot of time telling it to like dive into a specific thing. So it gave kind of an interesting, and I'm going to post this with this episode. So you should be able to find that when this episode goes live at lmc.fm. So I'll post this and you can, read it along, but it gives kind of a spattering and an interesting series of perspectives and summaries around this topic, ranging from kind of psychology perspectives to kind of stoicism perspectives, existential perspectives. It talks about certain related topics. But one of the first things that I noticed about this, so the main thing that it really dove into was that it identified what I was talking about in that episode as being sort of a combination topic of what you might call the hedonic treadmill and also a rival fallacy. Now, it's interesting because I've heard these terms before, like I'm not unfamiliar with them conceptually, but it's not how I was thinking about it in my head. But I think it actually kind of correctly identified this pretty well. I was thinking about this in terms of a more active procedure, right? Where we are almost consciously, constantly moving the goalposts on ourselves and what that means. But the next question then, logically, and that narrow perspective is really what I was thinking about when I recorded the last episode. But the next question would be, why do we move the goalposts on ourselves? I was spending a lot of time examining the pros and cons of moving the goalposts, like whether that's a net positive or a net negative for a person. The next question would be, why are you moving the goalposts? And a very reasonable answer to that is because of things like arrival fallacy and hedonic adaptation. So these concepts, if you're not familiar, hedonic adaptation is the idea that psychologically speaking, we will adapt to things and they become the new normal. And this often gets referred to as the hedonic treadmill. So the idea is, let's say you reach some level of success and you're there for a little bit. You will psychologically adapt to, and now that is your new normal. And therefore, if you are kind of an ambitious person, you are likely to then set yourself a new goal, which is then further away, because the thing you reached is now just normal. That's sort of the idea. And where it becomes like sort of the metaphor becomes a treadmill is that particularly in at least American type culture, we do this where like it's a never ending thing, right? And the idea of a treadmill is that, of course, you never go anywhere. You're just kind of walking or running in place because you're just always moving the goal, but never actually getting anywhere, because when you get there, you just move it again. And that's sort of the idea. So it was interesting, I thought, that it identified that as what I was talking about, because it was almost like the next question down. It's not exactly what I was getting at. I was trying to examine the pros and cons of the mindset itself. This was answering the question of why might this be happening, but very interesting. It also talks a bit through like Stoic and Buddhist type of perspectives on this. Buddhism, like many things, that it really, the overall idea comes down that, ambition towards external goals tends to result in ongoing suffering, right? And Stoicism is similar, where from that viewpoint, it's not that success is necessarily good or bad. It's fine to become successful, but it shouldn't necessarily be the thing you're shooting for. The success should be an outcome outside and around what the actual goals are. So, for instance, you may be a good goal is to create something noble. And if you are successful in that endeavor, great. But if you fail in that endeavor, that's also okay, because you are pushing towards that noble goal, whatever it is. Buddhism is similar in terms of its perspective around this. And it does kind of come back again to this idea of an arrival fallacy, where if all you're doing is focusing on the goal itself, or all you're doing is focusing on the success itself, I should say, then when you get there, you are likely to be disappointed. You may arrive at momentary happiness, but if the things it took to become successful were not virtuous and noble and worthwhile in their own right, then the success itself will be short-lived, is sort of the idea. That's a more philosophical standpoint. The other thing that was identified in here that very much struck home for me is that it's called out, in this research, that the people who have the most happiness or the most satisfaction with their path in life, they could be, societally successful or unsuccessful, but it's the people who have used their path to grow and learn. And that's a researched thing with several citations. And I found that really hit home for me around this whole thing. So the idea being, again, it's fine to be successful, but when you look back on things, or even while you're doing it, and some of this is about sort of the enjoy the journey, it's about the journey, not the destination kind of thing. The people who are most satisfied are the ones who can recognize in the moment that what they should be focusing on is making the most of the process and having that process help them grow and learn over time. And it makes sense, because even when you get there, because a success, like let's talk about, again, professional kind of stuff, something like a promotion can be taken from you just as easily as it can be given to you or earned. However, what can't be taken from you is what you learned in order to earn that promotion. So even if the promotion is gone, you have still learned all the things. And maybe this is hitting, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I've been applying around for positions recently. I am starting to get toward, I believe, the end phases of one or two of these opportunities. What I've noticed, so I don't talk about it too much on this show, but I was a CIO. By the time I was done that time, I was exceptionally burnt out. So it took me a little bit of time just to take a beat for myself, charge back up a little bit. Now that I've been back on sort of the job hunt, so to speak, what I've really noticed is that when you put me in a room with people where, they're asking questions that I have relevant experience to, it's amazing to me how much I learned and retained, and how much of those conversations to me come so naturally. And it's a great feeling, because it's a reminder that I really did do this work and I did it well. Because I hit some of this, right? Some of this arrival fallacy stuff along the way, where I arrived. At a certain point, I was boosted in my career pretty significantly. And that gave me a temporary sense of arrival. But then the real work began. And I did kind of normalize around that and became just not complacent, but that was my new normal, was that now this was my role. So it wasn't exceptional anymore. But now, looking back and being able to discuss and utilize that information, and not just utilize it, but also just how naturally I'm able to speak on very complicated topics, because I did it. I did these things and I learned from them and I absorbed them. And now, in many ways, I am an expert on them. And in retrospect, that has been a wonderful way to offset some of these things that can lead to more, as the Buddhists would say, suffering, right? Because it's not that I just arrived and stopped. It's that I arrived and learned and grew. And maybe toward the end of that journey, I was a little too burnt out at that time to realize how much I had learned and grown. So I needed a minute to, kind of recharge. But now that I have, it's been very gratifying to realize that it's not just that I left a job. It's all the stuff. That was just one moment. It's all the stuff I learned along the way that was really worthwhile. And at the end of it all, that was the satisfying part. So anyway, if you're interested in this stuff, like I said, I'm going to post this thing that ChatGPT spit out. It is kind of it's a fairly easy read. It's not super, super long. It's only 9 pages. And it's pretty skimmable. But check it out if you have a minute. Feel free to download it. It's just this is what ChatGPT spit out for me using deep research after the last episode and essentially putting the transcript through. Enjoy.